Hey everyone, welcome to our lesson on two-way tables. Two-way tables are a neat way to lay out data that compares two different types of events in two categories. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about these terms here first so that we will know how to relate to them when we fill out our table. So things we need to know and talk about are the term frequency. Frequency means the number of times an event occurs, the amount of times. And then you may also hear the word association when you're dealing with these, and that's just referring to the type of relationship that the data may have. When you see your percentages all laid out in this type of table, you can compare and see if there's any kind of relationship between your events. That's very neat. So we're going to look at a real-life example and practice filling out a table. And do just that. We're going to look at the information and see if we can determine an association between some things in our table. So we are going to take a look at an example where 150 residents of a city were polled, and they were asked a couple of questions. They were asked if they were teenagers or not, and this particular poll turned out that 30% were teenagers. Of those 30% of that group, 40% owned a car. They were also asked that question. And of the group that was not teenagers, 80% owned a car. So we're going to use all this information to fill out a two-way table that lays these two categories of events out. How many people actually were teenagers, how many were not, how many owned a car out of each group. So to find your exact amount from percentage information like this, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply the percent by the total. So for instance, if you need to know this amount, which we do to fill out our table, the amount of people that were teenagers, well, we know that it was 30%, so we're going to take 0.30 and multiply it by the total amount of people to get that number. That's going to give us 45. So we know 45 people were teenagers. Now, we know some things that are implied because of this information as well. If we know 30% were teenagers, we know that 70% were not. So we can use that fact to find the other amount of people that were not teenagers. Or we can use the fact that we know the total is 150 and subtract our 45 to get our other number. Either way that you want to do it. So 45 were teenagers, 105 were not. All right, out of the group, this group here, that were teenagers, it also told us that 40% of those owned a car. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our 40%, 0.40, of just that group of people to find that amount. And we will come up with 18 if we multiply that out. So you're going to continue to do this with the information here, just multiplying each percentage by the amount to find what you need for the table. And we just found that we found the amount for the group of teenagers and the amount in that group that owned a car, and that was 18. So we're going to put that information here. Remember that total, the amount of teenagers was 45. So we know that this column here should add up to 45. So again, we can find that missing square by subtracting. 45 minus 18, get 27. Remember, we also found the amount that were not teenagers to be 105 total. So we're going to put that there. And if we go back and find the percentage times the amount that owned a car versus not owning a car, the same way, you will come up with these amounts here, 84 and 21. Now, we want a total across our rows and columns. So you want to add up each row, that in your total column here. And when you're finished, you do want to make sure that each row and column here do in fact add up to our 150, because remember, we only polled 150 people, so we shouldn't come up with any extras with our numbers here. They should both add up perfectly, and they do. All right, so we have our information now for these two types of events in these two categories. Now we're going to see if we can use it to find some kind of relationship, some type of association. So what you want to do to do that is you want to compare the relative frequencies, and we talked about that term. Remember, it's how many times that event occurs. So relative frequency is going to be the number of things in a particular category divided by total. So for instance, let's see if the group of teenagers are more likely to own a car versus just any individual owning a car. Let's say we wanted to know that. So what we would do is we would compare the relative frequency of owning a car for any age in the group of 150 people to the relative frequency of teenagers owning a car. So let's do that now. So those who owned a car in our table, if you refer back to the table, total that owned a car was 102, that amount. And the total amount of people polled were 150 people. And if you divide this, you're going to get 0.68, which is representing 68% approximately. Okay, if you go back and look at the table at the teenagers who owned a car, you've got to match up those categories. We found that first. That was our 18. Over the total amount of teenagers, which is 45, if we divide that, we're going to get 0.40 approximately, which is about 40%. Always want to move that decimal back over to the right to get back to percentages. All right, so let's see what we have here. Out of those that were any age in the whole survey, 68% owned a car, and of the group that were teenagers, 40% owned a car. So we can determine a relationship. Were the teenagers more likely or less likely or about equally likely to own a car as anyone else? Well, our teenage percentage was a little bit less than the total of the whole population surveyed. So according to our two-way table, they were less likely. But again, that was just a sample. The more people that you have in your population being surveyed, probably the more accurate the results will be. That was just our association for our example. So let's review a little bit. To make a two-way table, you're going to have two categories and two different events. To find the percentage or the amounts to put in your table, you're going to take the percentage times the total.